In today's video, we are reviewing another Poker Out Loud hand where we explore the concept of range awareness, which is critically important to understand how board cards and actions impact ranges and in turn the equity of your hand.
This is a reasonable flop for our hand. Obviously, we have some backdoor potential with our pair here. I expect Christian to be checking to us here a lot of the time. It feels slightly water. He might lead. However, given that he checked to us, I think we should still continue and just see bet in this hand.
The bet is 45.
So we're playing seven-handed with an ante, and on this flop, Xuan is faced with two questions. One, does she want to bet? And two, if so, what sizing should she choose? On the first point, her decision will be largely driven by the overall range matchup and where her hand ranks relative to villain's equity distribution. One general rule of thumb is that the pre-flop aggressor will in most scenarios have the overall range advantage due to overpairs, which is the case here as the pre-flop caller will usually 3-bet all of his pocket queens plus. So based on the range matchup, we know that overall, Xuan will want to do a decent amount of betting. So what about the second point? Where does her hand rank relative to villain's equity distribution? For newer players, it can be very hard to assess equity, as it requires some basic understanding of how villain's range is comprised. Although it's very easy for us to evaluate this with our nice ranges that are color-coded by strength, in the moment it can be very hard to accurately visualize the types of combos villain is likely holding from a probability standpoint. And so there's a significant risk, especially if you haven't done a lot of solver work, to hyper-focus on just a few select combos, which may not be representative of the entire range. So one simple trick that can be used to address this problem and to force you to consider the entire range is to go through a checklist of the typical segments that comprise most ranges. Now there are a variety of different ways a range could be segmented, but the simplest method is to break villain's range into three primary groups: Broadway combos, pocket pairs, and suited combos. Broadway combos will almost always be the most prevalent segment of a range in virtually every scenario. Depending on the pre-flop action and the positions of the players, sometimes the offsuit Broadway combos will be less present, but usually this group will make up most of villain's range. So on this particular board, Xuan's pocket sixes are ahead of most of these combos other than obviously Jack X. The next most prominent segment is usually pocket pairs. Again, which pocket pairs are present will be heavily dependent on the pre-flop actions of the players and their positions, but Xuan's sixes are likely behind most of the combos in this group. And the final segment are weaker suited combos, which includes suited connectors and big little suited hands like suited aces and kings. Although a few combos in this segment do connect with this board to some degree, such as Jack X suited or 7-6 suited, for the most part, the big blind should have plenty of unmade hands that are behind Xuan's pocket sixes. Now clearly this method isn't going to scientifically give you the exact equity of your hand, but it can be helpful to give you a general sense of where you stand, and it mitigates the risk of hyper-focusing on certain specific combos. And based on this analysis, sixes are likely ahead of most of Christian's range, but at the same time are behind a significant number of combos as well, so it likely has medium strength and could go either way as a check or bet. So how should Xuan decide which path she proceeds down? Well, one thing she notes is that her hand has backdoor qualities. It has both a backdoor straight and flush draw, and we do see that pocket sixes with a diamond bet most of the time, and pocket sixes without a diamond check most of the time. So one easy way to differentiate which hands you fire with to avoid being overly aggressive or overly passive would be to just fire when holding a diamond. And after deciding to bet, the next step is to think about sizing. In our bet sizing heuristic, we showed how size is largely a function of villain's overall equity distribution. And in this case, although Xuan's range is probably stronger, the big blind's range likely does have many hands with decent equity on this board, which will often be the case in single raised pots versus the big blind on lower connected boards, especially when they are two-tone. Christian likely has plenty of Jack X, 7X, and 5X. He also has a bunch of flush draws, straight draws between the 5 and 7 and 7 Jack, as well as many overcards with backdoor flush draws. And so in this type of scenario, Schwann's value bets will have the incentive to bet on the larger side to extract max value, and her bluffs will also have the incentive to bet larger to get more folds.
Okay, so she chooses a pretty good size in my opinion. Representative of her range. She's not going to be betting a pure range here. But our hand is like pretty much too weak to check raise. So we just pretty much land at the middle portion of our range. So we're not going to do much here but call. Hands that I would check raise are 6-8, 8-9, things like that. And then maybe like ace jack, king jack with a diamond is like the stone bottom, but these positions are pretty tight ranges, especially from her, so we're gonna play pure call. We do get some leads on a fair amount of turns, something like a 6 would be pretty good for us to lead. 10 would be a miracle because it'll increase her bluff frequency, but we're gonna start with a call.
Call.
So Christian decides to just call, which we see is the favored play by the solver. He considers raising, but recognizes he has some better hands to do that with on the value side, such as ace jack and king jack. He also should have hands like jack 7 suited, 7-5, 7s and 5s, so checking seems to be the standard play.
Pretty much the nut low card on the turn, or one of them at least. Not gonna be doing much here, but check.
Check.
The offsuit ace is a pretty good card for us. I don't expect him to be peeling with too many ace X hands unless he has 2 pair at this point. Or maybe something with the ace of diamonds. However, considering we have a diamond in our hand, that subtracts on those combos as well. So this is definitely a card where I want to barrel for a pretty large size, considering that there are a fair number of draws on that flop. So I will probably just size something between 60 to 75% pot again. And expect to potentially fire another barrel on the river if it seems like an advantageous card for us.
$110.
Schwann decides to barrel her underpair, and we do see that the solver does fire virtually all of its pocket 6s with the diamond. So is this a value bet or a bluff? The answer is yes. Back in the day, you would often hear poker players say that when betting, you need to decide if you're making a value bet or a bluff. But the solver doesn't know what a value bet or a bluff is. It only knows one thing: maximizing EV. And the way you figure out how to maximize EV is by considering how an action will perform on average across all the possible hands villain is likely to have. And some of those hands are strong and some of them are weak, so your hand will accrue EV against the entire range in different ways. On the weaker end of the spectrum are Christian's draws, and he should have plenty of them, particularly from the suited segment. 10-9, 10-8, 9-8, 9-6, 8-6, 6-4, 6-3, 4-3, as well as a bunch of flush draws. Schwann can accrue additional EV by charging these hands to see a river. She could also accrue EV by protecting against some floats from the Broadway segment, such as King-Queen of Spades. And on the stronger end of the spectrum, Christian has some better hands that are likely, at least some of the time, to fold to another barrel, such as combos from the pocket pair segment, like pocket 10s, 9s, or 8s. And it's also possible that she'll get some folds from 7x and even Jack X combos given the ace turn. Although Schwann doesn't specifically refer to this action as a bluff, the first thing she recognizes off the bat is that the offsuit ace is better for her range because Christian likely folded most of his ace-x combos against the flop bet. This in turn gives her pocket 6s more fold leverage against superior hands. If, on the other hand, the turn was something like a blank deuce of clubs, then we see the solver does a lot more checking overall, including with her pocket 6s. Schwann also recognizes that she may barrel the river if an advantageous card for her peels off, And in that regard, holding a diamond in this spot is a positive factor because it will be a better hand to continue bluffing with if the flush completes.
110 is a little strange. It just kind of doesn't fit the incentives of her range. Like, this is mostly like a big better check spot in my opinion. Her hand, I guess, is like ace 10, and she's like playing it for its absolute strength. Maybe she has like queens that she's like sizing down with, but I would kind of expect a different bet size, to be honest. It's kind of strange. I think we're forced to call one more. It's a little bit thin. And then we'll see. Not really loving the situation, to be honest, but maybe we need a diamond to be able to check raise. I'm not sure. This sizing is a little strange. I think we're forced to call one more. I think we're a little bit too strong of a range. So we're gonna call.
Call.
So Christian is clearly surprised by the bet, though as we saw, it was the primary sizing used by the solver, even when we gave it the option to bet larger. If I had to guess, Christian was focused on the fact that the ace made Xuan's range much stronger, relatively speaking, increasing her nut advantage. However, as we discussed in our bet sizing video, nut advantage is only one part of the equation. The other part is based on the opponent's equity distribution. And in this case, the ace is a relatively dynamic card that significantly shifts the equity profiles of both players. If instead the turn was more static, like the deuce of clubs, then we see that the overbet becomes the predominant sizing used. However, this ace crams down the strength of much of Christian's range, and when your opponent's range becomes more skewed towards weakness, this actually will often result in relatively smaller sizings. So for example, if Xuan had overbet, then a large chunk of Christian's range would have had an easy decision to fold, including virtually all draws other than combo draws, and most underpairs, which is a result that you don't really want if you're betting for value. However, with the medium-sized bet, a much greater portion of Christian's weakened range is forced to continue, and most importantly, it puts a ton of hands in his range in a very difficult spot. We saw a tangible manifestation of this, where when facing the bet, Christian became visibly uncomfortable. He wasn't sure if his hand was strong enough to call, and whether he needed a diamond to do so. And this is precisely the type of response an appropriately sized bet is designed to elicit. It should give as much of villain's range a difficult decision as possible. In this case, Jack X is the single most likely hand in Christian's range, and against this bet size, virtually all of these combos are essentially indifferent from an EV standpoint between calling and folding.
Check.
Christian just elects to check really quickly on this river. The river obviously completes the flush draw, and 8-9 also gets there for the straight. He can also potentially have two pair type hands, like obviously Jack 10, some suited 10-7s. Obviously, our hand is such that we don't expect to be winning if we check here. We do have a diamond in our hand. Again, that makes it slightly more favorable that he wasn't on the flush draw. It's just a matter of if we do choose to bluff this hand, considering that we did bet the turn with the sizing that he did, if it's credible that we are presenting a flush here, since a lot of ace X hands are actually going to be checking this behind or making it a size that's on the smaller end, I would say. So given the energy that Christian checked this river with, it seems that he's not very inclined to fold. But let's see if we can credibly represent something like a 2-pair type hand that's going for pretty thin value. And hope he doesn't have a hand exactly like Jack 10.
The bet is 260.
So Schwan decides to fire a third barrel, which the solver does 100% of the time with her sixes, and now this bet is no longer merged. It is purely a bluff. And the way that she arrived at her decision was by running down the list of possible hands that have her beat. Flushes, straights, 2 pairs, etc. The longer that list becomes, the farther it crams down the strength of her hand. One thing that she doesn't go into great detail on is how, among all the weak hands in her range, she decided to bluff her particular combo. She does mention liking the fact that she's holding a diamond, and we see that with the flush blocker, betting even larger is viable. If we had to guess, she may have made this decision primarily intuitively, but for newer players, it may be difficult to recognize the fact that a weak pocket pair is a mandatory bluff in this spot. And this is another situation where having a checklist of range segments could come in handy. So let's start with our Broadway combos. Among these hands, everything has made something stronger than pocket sixes. Ace X is top pair, King Queen makes a straight, and all other Broadway combos either have a 10, jack, or a flush. What about her suited combos? Well, pretty much all of these hands that she barreled with has either made a top pair or flush. And this means that when we think about her pocket pairs with the 5 and 7 on the flop, she has very few weak hands in her range other than pocket sixes and 4s that can support all of her strong hands that want to bet. So even without a diamond, sixes are just a must fire in this situation.
So the question is, does she value bet worse? And the answer to that is pretty much no, always. I don't think she's ever value betting ace king here. Have to be like ace king with the ace of diamond, king of diamonds. No, I don't think she's value betting worse. So is she not value betting worse? Is she bluffing? Does she have enough bluffs in this line? Queen 10 doesn't really take that size on the turn though. King 10, she's not bluffing with. There's also 10 on the board, and I have 10 in my hand, so that's unlikely. She's not value betting worse. 6-8 gets there, 8-9 gets there.
Folds, Jack 10.
So even though Christian guesses wrong here, from a theory standpoint, his decision was correct. And I really like how he structured his overall thought process. The first thing that he does is he assesses what the bottom part of Schwan's value betting range should be. If he thinks she's betting Jack 10 here for value, then Jack 10 would likely be a pure call. He ultimately concludes that she is not value betting anything weaker than Jack 10, which means that his hand is a mere bluff catcher. Next, Christian considers Schwan's bluffs, listing off a couple of 10x combos such as Queen 10 and King 10, but then he notes that he's blocking some of these. So he ultimately decides that she probably doesn't have enough bluffs in this spot, and he opts to fold. However, note that he did not specifically consider the possibility that she was bluffing lower pocket pairs, which is, I would say, a more advanced maneuver. The solver will often fire lower pocket pairs as bluffs, particularly as the ranges become tighter and with broadways on the board, because that will usually mean that you don't have many other weaker candidates to bluff with, and lower pocket pairs tend to unblock things like missed straight draws and middling underpairs. So what could be some better bluff catching candidates here in Christian's shoes? Well, maybe something like Jack 7 or 7-5 that block fewer of Schwan's bluffs, or Ace X and Jack X combos with a diamond, which block more of Schwan's value. But unfortunately for Christian, he did not have any of these combos, so he respected the bet and laid his hand down. And as for Schwan, I think overall she displayed a strong sense of understanding how the board and prior actions impacted the ranges, and how that in turn changed the equity of her hand, transforming it from value into a bluff.